Hello, my name's Ken Bowser, and my talk today is on the current double sextile of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. This rare combination will be in play from 2025 to 2028. These planets set the overall tone of an epoch, especially when they configure each other. Their mutual combinations signify the most consequential periods of any era, even when they are quiet and not attended by fanfare, warfare, prosperity, or deprivation. In this video, I'll describe what we can expect during this period and what this trio has brought us in the past. Major developments appear when these three planets come into relationship. This combination has ushered in groundbreaking inventions like the steam engine, the printing press, and major events like men on the moon. I'm a Western sidereal astrologer, and the zodiacal placements in this video are given in terms of Western sidereal zodiac reckoning. But the aspects between planets are exactly the same, whether tropical or sidereal. The most enduring aspects of this cycle are between Neptune and Pluto. Bear with me as I describe the unique relationship between these two planets. It gets a little technical, but understanding this planet combination is important as they set the stage for the most radical changes in our world. The Neptune and Pluto cycle has dominated the entire post-World War II era to date. These two planets had already come into a loose sextile relationship by the end of the Second World War in 1945. The sextile between them lasts into the 2030s. The special element within the Neptune-Pluto relationship is the extreme eccentricity of Pluto's orbit, which sends Pluto inside the orbit of Neptune for 2 decades, centered around Pluto's perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun. The proximity to Pluto's perihelion, however, both approaching and leaving it, makes Pluto's aspects with Neptune repeat year after year within a span of 8 decades, which powerfully emphasizes the astrological effect of the combination. The Neptune-Pluto contacts near perihelion, which in recent historical time have occurred in 1494, 1741, and 1989, always behave this way, when they fall away from exact contacts in the middle of the 80-year run, only to resume exact contacts 3 decades later. There are 2 main arenas of the combination, which are paradoxically juxtaposed. One, which centers around religion, the occult, and spirituality per se, which manifests as the desire for freedom from and within organized religion, and the other, totally secular in nature, shows itself via technical breakthroughs that quickly displace the old order. Specifically, regarding the present long-term sextile, transiting Neptune made its first exact to the minute sextile with transiting Pluto in January 1950, and then 14 more until 1957, when the sextile began to fall away from exact. It didn't fall away by much, and resumed exact to the minute sextiles in 1976, and made 18 more of those until it began to fall away from exact again in 1987. The exact sextile does not form up again exactly until 2026, and then will make 12 more exact to the minute contacts through and including 2032, after which it will fall away from exact and by 2035 will no longer be within 2 degrees at closest approach. Neptune and Pluto will not combine again exactly in a long-term repeating sextile until another 400 years have elapsed. This behavior has been characteristic of both the waxing sextile after Neptune-Pluto conjunctions, as well as the waning Neptune-Pluto trine preceding Neptune-Pluto conjunctions, which bracket Pluto's perihelion, since the synodic cycle between the two that began with the Neptune-Pluto conjunction in the year 905 of the current era. During the preceding Neptune-Pluto cycle, that began with their conjunction in 411 and 412 CE, the recurring aspects between them were a mix of mostly the semi-square and sesquiquadrate, with a lesser number of sextiles and trines until the 905 cycle, when the sextiles and trines had begun to predominate. By the time of the Neptune-Pluto conjunction of 1398-1399, the transition to sextiles and trines as the only repeating long-term aspects was complete, that had been partial until the 1398 cycle. The Neptune-Pluto repeating aspects before and after the conjunctions of 578-577 BCE and 84-83 BCE, centered around Pluto's perihelion, were the semi-square and sesquiquadrate exclusively. Specifically, in relatively recent time, Neptune, dignified in its own sign, Pisces, came to within 2 degrees of the trine to Pluto in 1700, at closest approach, and then the exact to the minute trine to Pluto in Cancer began in 1704, followed by 75 exact trines thereafter until 1742, 2 per year except for 1742 when there were 3. The aspect fell away from exact in 1743 and did not reform exactly until 1774, when it resumed 2 exact to the minute trines per year through and including 1785, which produced an additional 22 exact contacts. By 1792, the contact at closest approach had fallen beyond 4 degrees. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to the religious element, long-term Neptune-Pluto combinations are consistently attended by a powerful surge in scientific innovation and cultural advance. All these things are well demonstrated by the printing explosion of the 15th century, the artistic bloom of the Renaissance, and the deviance of the Reformation of the 16th century, the discovery of 21 chemical elements during the 18th century Enlightenment versus 1 chemical element discovered in the previous 300 years, as well as the general but sudden intellectual expansion that characterized the widespread embrace of the calculus, which set the 18th century apart from earlier eras. In general, the blinders come off with Neptune and Pluto in aspect. What was concealed is revealed, such that what was formerly sacred and mysterious becomes temporal and clear. Neptune and Pluto combinations are also attended by a feature that organized religion strives desperately to suppress: a pronounced increase in interest and activity in the occult arts. The combination is actually much more spiritually attuned than strictly religious along denominational lines. Those born under a Neptune-Pluto combination very often dismiss, disdain, or ignore dogma, credo, and doctrine, but are more receptive to the spirit behind and often smothered by institutionalized religion than those who attend church on a regular basis. Pluto makes extreme whatever it touches, and with Neptune, questions about consciousness, energy, and the deeper, heretofore unknown nature of life itself force their way into consciousness. Questions for which the Church has no answers beyond acceptance of faith. People often feel the need to address those questions for themselves when a Neptune-Pluto combination is operational. The dynamic nature of Neptune sextile Pluto is strongest when the aspect becomes partile. The most significant relationship between the 3 outer planets actually ended World War II, although it did not manifest in a close zodiacal aspect or in equatorial coordinates, which are right ascension and declination. During a 10-month period that extended from April 1945 to early February 1946, Pluto remained within a half degree of the exact midpoint between Uranus and Neptune. The first atomic bomb was exploded at Alamogordo, New Mexico, on July 16, 1945, and 2 more were dropped on Japan, one on August 6th at Hiroshima and the other on August 9th at Nagasaki. The world has not been the same since then. The post-World War II Neptune-Pluto sextile began with the most important discovery in biology of all time to date: the discovery of the deoxyribonucleic acid molecule, better known by its acronym DNA, in 1953, which is the key to most subsequent developments in biology since then, whose mysteries had been the exclusive preserve of religion up to that time. As if in a synchronous but inverse relationship, church attendance has plummeted over the past 75 years. In stark contrast, extreme and rapid advances in electronics and engineering put men on the moon by 1969, and then in 1998, a supermassive black hole was discovered in the center of our Milky Way galaxy, 400 million times the mass of the Sun, which finally fleshed out the main characteristics of this galaxy. Accelerated growth characteristically attends the long-term Neptune-Pluto combinations in all fields. It's a modernizing force. Now the last part of the long-term Neptune-Pluto sextile is about to begin, which will bring the three outer planets into mutual aspect. During the years 2025 through 2028, Uranus and Taurus will be trine Pluto and Capricorn. Simultaneously, Uranus will be sextile Neptune dignified in Pisces, while Neptune will be sextile Pluto to form a double sextile within the trine. Uranus will come to the first exact sextile with Neptune on August 29, 2025, and make 4 more exact-to-the-minute contacts in 2025, 2026, and 2027. Uranus will approach to within a half degree of the sextile to Neptune in 2028. Uranus will come to the trine with Pluto only 7 minutes removed from exact on September 21st, 2025. The closest approach to the exact grand sextile will be on July 18th, 2026, when the outer planet trio will be again only 7 minutes from the perfect 60-60-120. The first exact Uranus-Pluto trine will be on that same day, that is July 18th, 2026. There will be 4 more exact-to-the-minute Uranus-Pluto trines in 2026, 27, and 28. The last one will be on May 10th, 2028. It's rare for the 3 outer planets to form up together in major aspect. Centuries occasionally pass between major simultaneous Ptolemaic aspects between the 3 of them. 3-way relationships between them are more common in equatorial coordinates. Either way, they generally bring groundbreaking discoveries in their wake. For example, during 1821, when Uranus and Neptune were conjoined in Sagittarius, the exaltation sign of Uranus, less than 1 degree apart, they came to within 1 degree of the square to Pluto in the summer of that year. On September 3rd, 1821, Michael Faraday demonstrated what he called electromagnetic rotation, which was the first electric motor. That discovery subsequently led to his inventions of the electric generator, the dynamo, the transformer, and after his death, the subsequent electrification of the world, which began in earnest with the Neptune-Pluto conjunctions of 1891 and 1892. The 18th century was called the Enlightenment, due to the unimpeded flowering of new ideas reflected by the Neptune-Pluto trine that was in play for most of the 18th century. As mentioned, Neptune and Pluto in combination represent a collapse or weakening of orthodoxy in general. That has never been total, but by the 17th century, a weakening of ironclad standards was manifest that had been enforced by the Catholic Church until the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which ended the 30 Years' War. Uranus and Neptune were not exactly conjoined in 1648, but both Neptune and Uranus played tag, opposing Pluto alternately closely and exactly during 1648. Westphalia extended a 16th century doctrine known as cuius regio, vius religio, which is whose realm his religion, into a more broad 17th century context that effectively stopped the Catholic Church from meddling in politics, at least in terms of actual military support. Westphalia, in effect, made the 18th century Enlightenment possible because all 3 outer planets in 1648 were involved in 2 tight oppositions simultaneously. That is, the Church was the loser in the Treaty of Westphalia, which in effect ended the Reformation of the Catholic Church with Protestant denominations firmly established. Uranus and Pluto have not been in a simultaneous trine relationship with Neptune, however, to form a grand trine, since their closest approach when they came to within 1 2/3 degrees of the exact 3-way trine in November 1771. James Watt, who invented the critical improvement, the condenser, to the steam engine that made it practical, and which promptly ushered in the industrial age, conceived the solution in 1765. The patent for the condenser was not issued until 1769, but the first commercially available steam engine, with all the bugs worked out, was not put into service until 1776. Within months, after its first use to drive large-scale pumps to drain flooded mines, steam engines were employed as power sources in the first factories. Mass production was among the most important results of the industrial age, which more radically improved the standard of living of everyday people throughout the world than any other development in history until possibly the advent of the transistor in 1947, the integrated circuit in 1958, and the microchip in 1959. On a similar scale, the three outer planet combinations that formed up in the middle of the 15th century in quick succession were not less consequential. Uranus made 4 exact sextiles with Neptune between September 5th, 1453 and May 11th, 1455, followed by Uranus conjoined to Pluto on September 22nd, 1455 and June 15th, 1456, and finally by Neptune sextile Pluto, which began its 80-year-long term relationship of exact contacts on February 4th, 1460. This is the same pattern as the Neptune-Pluto conjunction of 1891-1892 and the exact long-term Neptune-Pluto sextile that began in 1950. Johannes Gutenberg printed the first complete copies of the 42-line Bible, the first major book made with movable metal types, on February 23, 1455. He'd been working on it since 1453. He had published Latin grammars and certificates of indulgence for the Church from 1452 onward. The 42-line Bible represents the second information revolution, the first being the invention of writing itself, which opened up the world to the facts and knowledge of the past as well as contemporary thought and what will be known in the future. Uranus involved with Neptune is often like this, that is, having the lights turned on. It's very symbolic of breakthroughs, dreams made real, and insight that supplies resolution to confounding problems. Just as consistently, it signifies the critical revelation associated with invention, discovery, and new technology. Revelation turned to revolution as the Uranus-Neptune sextile moved to Uranus conjoined to Pluto. It was a quiet revolution, but immense in scope, as printing presses were quickly set up all over Europe, and from there to widespread adoption and dissemination as Pluto got involved with the sextile to Neptune. The spur to literacy was enormous, with ramifications that quickly changed the world irrevocably. The symbolism that ensured a pivotal change was a hard aspect. Saturn exalted in Libra, with square Pluto in Cancer, from December 19th, 1453 to October 2nd, 1454. A new standard was therefore invoked, which facilitated individual expansion based solely on knowledge, merit, and facts. Before 1500 CE, the traditional beginning of the modern era, there were a few thousand books in circulation in all of Europe, because it takes 18 months for a monk to copy one, much more for large works. Modern estimates place the population of Europe, excluding Russia and the Ottoman Empire, at 61 million in 1500 of the current era. Printing presses supplied books in the millions almost overnight to subsequent generations of literati. The European Renaissance got underway circa 1460, which got into high gear in the 16th century. Neptune and Pluto made 48 exact-to-the-minute sextiles from 1460 to 1483. Again, 2 per year, when the contact fell away from exact, but then resumed 2 exact-to-the-minute contacts per year in 1536 through and including 1540. The contact remained within 3 degrees at closest approach through 1544. This demonstrates that the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and the current long-term Neptune-Pluto sextile have all given rise to not just noteworthy, but outsized leaps in cultural, technical, and social sophistication, which is the essence of the contact. It was during this long Neptune-Pluto sextile that Copernicus completed his masterwork on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, which invoked an astronomical revolution when he committed the heresy of postulating that the Earth orbits the Sun. These past combinations serve as examples of what can be expected from the double sextile, underway now, that will be in effect until 2028. Artificial intelligence is the most obvious feature on the horizon, but all technologies that are nearing operational status will be heavily weighted due to the tremendous scale of everything in the world now, driven by huge populations and their prodigious needs. One can only speculate about the coming developments, although it's reasonable to predict profound discoveries in physics, biochemistry, transportation and exploration, cerebro-electronic assists, and power sources, in particular a cheap, high-capacity solar battery. The issue that will interest most people will be age extension, as the factor that causes aging, the lack of certain proteins that people stop making as they age, will be artificially supplied. People will eventually start to die at 150 or beyond, not because they wore out, but because they were hit by a bus or some other accident. I suspect the most radical developments will be interdimensional exploration, time travel, and possible contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. All that one can say with confidence is that these new things will radically change the world. All of the three-way outer planet combinations go back to the triple conjunction of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in 577 BCE, discovered by the late Charles Harvey several decades ago. The three of them were only 1 degree, 48 minutes apart in celestial longitude at closest approach on June 30th, 577 BCE, although they were separated by less than a half degree in right ascension in 576 BCE. This triple conjunction will not come together again until 3369 and 3370 CE, more than 13 centuries into the future, when it will again be 2 degrees from exact. This triple conjunction period of the 6th century BCE roughly corresponds to what the German philosopher and psychiatrist Karl Jaspers called the Axial Age. His Axial Age was a period of general increase in intellectual and cultural sophistication in widely separated cultures without intercultural contact. Jaspers painted with a broad brush. His limits of the Axial Age extend from 800 BCE to 300 BCE, which puts the outer planet triple conjunction squarely in the middle of the Axial Age, during the era of Pythagoras and the pre-Socratics in Greece, the cradle of the West. It was this psycho-spiritual theistic quintessence, added to the elements of fire, earth, air, and water, that signified something otherworldly, which distinguishes the union of the three outer planets and renders their aspect special. In a similar fashion, from higher forces to lesser, it is this period that began somewhat earlier in Mesopotamia, when the ability to recognize recurring cycles of planets and eclipses took arbitrary divination out of the hands of the gods and put it into the hands of men. The outer planet interrelationships don't always represent a scenario of unfailing joy if Saturn gets involved at some point in the relationship, as it must, since the orbits of Saturn through Pluto are subsets of each other. For example, when the Visigothic chief Alaric sacked Rome on August 24, 410 CE, the triple conjunction of Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto, all square Uranus, was a disaster for Rome and the de facto beginning of the end of Rome as a first-rank power and a repository of high civilization. The city was sacked for the first time in 800 years, and due to the pillaging and slaughter, one could rightly say that the Roman world was on its heels after that, which began 600 years of disorder and a lower state of civilization in the West. Not only was Saturn configured with Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus in 410, but Mars as well. In similar fashion, transiting Mars will oppose the current Saturn-Neptune conjunction in August 2025, and will therefore also form a trine with transiting Uranus and transiting Pluto. Fortunately, Mars does not station there. A month before Mars makes its grand trine with Uranus and Pluto in August 2025, Saturn gets involved with the three outer planets when they come together at their closest approach this summer. Typically, Saturn with Neptune signifies collapse, disillusion, fear, and insecurity, although sometimes it may symbolize the order that underlies abstraction. And here, transiting Saturn will be at the focal point of the double sextile. Something must fail completely before the world can be rebuilt along new lines. Enterprises or governments that are not well-founded or are severely overextended succumb under the strain of Saturn and Neptune combined. Transiting Saturn arrives at the focal point of the Uranus-Pluto trine when both Saturn and Neptune are at their retrograde stations, separated by less than a quarter degree. Specifically, Saturn turns retrograde on July 14th, 2025 at 6 Pisces, 50 minutes. And Neptune turns retrograde on July 4th, 2025 at 7 Pisces and 4 minutes. Transiting Saturn arrives at the focal point of the Uranus-Pluto trine when both Saturn and Neptune are at their retrograde stations, separated by less than a quarter degree. Specifically, Saturn turns retrograde on July 14th, 2025 at 6 Pisces and 50 minutes. And Neptune turns retrograde on July 4th, 2025 at 7 Pisces and 4 minutes. Both Saturn and Neptune land on an important place for the United States, the chart for the Federal Reserve Bank, the de facto bank of the United States, better known as the Fed. The midheaven of the horoscope for the United States Federal Reserve holds 6 Pisces 49 minutes, and the Pluto of that chart is 6 Gemini 32 minutes retrograde. Usually the effect of transiting Neptune square natal Pluto is to be backed into a corner in some manner. Transiting Saturn square natal Pluto is the end of the road of a long cycle. The conjunction of transiting Saturn and transiting Neptune at the MC of the Fed, simultaneously attended by Uranus and Pluto waiting in the wings, suggests that 2025 will be an unstable and tumultuous year, probably attended by calamities that relate to the simultaneous collapse of teetering fiat currencies, certainly cryptocurrencies, and an enormous equity bubble. When transiting Saturn moves off Neptune in the spring of 2026, and when transiting Jupiter comes to the opposition to Pluto in the summer of 2026, the worst will probably be over, but the damage will not be possible to put right overnight. The two major wildcards are extreme weather conditions that already are drowning areas normally arid and parching others that should be wet. The other is military exploits driven by religious fervor and hatred. One can say with reasonable assurance, however, that the world will be remade in the middle of this decade. The last years of the 2020s look much more promising than the middle. Now on to resources for anyone who wants to know more about my work. The book on the left, An Introduction to Western Sidereal Astrology, was my first book, now in its 3rd edition. This book includes the basics of Western sidereal astrology. Its 3 appendices touch upon the history of sidereal astrology, the tropical sidereal debate, and the explanation of the exaltations. The centerpiece of the book is the delineation of the 45 planet combinations, which can be used by both sidereal and tropical astrologers. The next resource is my interpretation course on Western sidereal astrology. This course is for intermediate and advanced students of astrology. This is the only course I know of that shows students how to incorporate in-mundo aspects and stars into their interpretations. The charts use Western sidereal longitude, but the course is also suitable for tropical astrologers since the same rules of interpretation apply to both schools. The last resource is my book, Primary Directions in the U.S. Chart. This is a good resource for anyone who wants to know more about the time I use for the chart of the U.S., and how this time is confirmed by primary directions. It also covers the various charts used for the U.S., including a complete analysis of the Sibley chart. The final book is a work in progress. I'm currently updating Cyril Fagan's first book, Zodiacs Old and New. It was published in 1950 and has long been out of print. Since Fagan's death in 1970, new information has come to light that supports Fagan's arguments about the antiquity of the sidereal zodiac. The final resource is my monthly mentoring program. The group is for both sidereal and tropical astrologers who want to expand their ability to read astrological symbolism. The group is designed to help students develop accurate, high-quality, in-depth interpretation skills using a variety of aspects and advanced techniques. You'll find more information about this group on my website. This concludes my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to be informed when new lectures are available, please subscribe to my channel and go to my website to sign up for my mailing list. On my website, you'll find articles, additional lectures, and webinars on a variety of astrological topics.